Jamie had $6.50 in his wallet when he left home. He spent $4.25 on drinks and $2 on a magazine. Later, his friend repaid him $2.50 that he had borrowed the previous day. How much money does Jamie have in his wallet? So the first thing I'd like to do is find the total amount of money that Jamie spent. And I see that he spent $4.25 and $2. So to find the total amount of money he spent, I need to add $4.25 plus $2. And it's very important that whenever you add numbers with decimals or subtract numbers with decimals, that you line up the decimals. So now I'm ready to add, and I can just bring my decimal down before I even start. 5 plus 0 is 5, 2 plus 0 is 2, 4 plus 2 is 6. So now I know he spent a total of $6.25. And if he spent that much money, then that's money that is taken away from what he had. So he started with $6.50, but he spent $6.25. So I have to subtract what he spent from what he had before. And again, we need to line up our decimals. I can't take 5 from 0, so I'm going to borrow from this 5. It becomes a 4. And now I have 10 minus 5 is 5. And 4 minus 2 is 2. Can bring down that decimal. 6 minus 6 is 0. So that means after he spent the $4.25 on the drinks and $2 on the magazine, he only had 25 cents left. But his friend repaid him $2.50, which means his friend gave him $2.50. So that's money that's added to his total. So now I'm going to take what he had after he spent his money and add the money his friend gave him. And again, we line up our decimals. 5 plus 0 is 5. 2 plus 5 is 7. Bring down the decimal. 0 plus 2 is 2. So after spending money and getting repaid money, he now has a total of $2.75, which is answer D. In a game of chance, 3 dice are cast simultaneously. What is the probability that all 3 will land with a 6 showing? Well, the probability of just 1 dice landing with a 6 showing is 1 out of 6. Since one of the numbers is a 6 out of a total of 6 numbers. And the other 2 dice have the same probability. So times 1/6 times 1/6. All of these events are independent of each other, meaning they don't affect each other, which is why we just multiply the 3 probabilities of the 3 dice together. So that means that the probability is 1 out of 6 times 6 is 36, times 6 is 216. So 1 in 216. Which, if you really think about it, makes a lot of sense. It's not very likely that when you roll 3 dice, you're going to get 3 6s. It's very unlikely. It doesn't happen very often. Maybe 1 time out of 216 times that you cast those dice. The diagram shows the outline of a racetrack for skaters, which consists of 2 long straight sections and 2 semicircular turns. Given the dimensions shown, which of the following most closely measures the perimeter of the entire track? Well, they've given us that this length here is 150 yards, apparently, since all of our answers are in yards. So that means that this opposite straight side here would also be 150 yards. And actually, just from that amount of information, we can already start eliminating some answers. I know that 180 yards is definitely not enough because I've got 150 and 150. So we're going to have to skate this 150, skate some more, skate another 150, and skate some more. So we know we're already over 180 yards. We also know it's going to be more than 300 yards because just the two straight sections are 300 yards. So we can already eliminate that answer choice. And we're down to these three possibilities. So that means we need to figure out what this distance is here and here. They told us that these were semicircular turns. That means that semi means half of a circle. So if you take these two halves of a circle and you put them together, you get one whole circle. So really they're traveling the distance of one whole circle in addition to these straight sides here, which means we need to find the circumference of our circle to find the distance around the circle. That's what circumference is. And the circumference of a circle is pi times the diameter of the circle, which they gave us. They told us that this distance is 30. Well, that goes all the way across my circle. So that's my diameter. So my circumference is 30 pi. And pi is about 3. It's actually a little over 3. But since they said most closely measures, we'd probably be okay just using 3 for pi. So our circumference is about 90 yards. Plus, we have these straight sides. So the total distance around the racetrack would be the 150 yards plus 150 yards for our two straight sides, plus the about 90 for these two curved sides, the semicircular, which is 390 yards. Now, if you'll remember, we rounded pi down. It's actually over 3. We rounded it down to 3. So really our answer is a little bit higher than 390, which is answer choice D, 395 yards. Kyle bats third in the batting order for the Badgers baseball team. The table shows the number of hits that Kyle had in each of 7 consecutive games played during 1 week in July. What is the mode of the numbers shown in the table? Mode means the number that occurs the most. So out of these numbers, 1 occurs 1, 2, 3 times. 2 occurs twice. 3 occurs once, and 4 occurs once. So the number that occurs the most, or the mode, is the number 1. Morris started work today at 7 a.m. and worked until 4:30 p.m. He earns $12 per hour for his regular shift, which is 8 hours, and 50% more per hour for overtime. How much did Morris make today? The first thing we want to do is find out how long Morris worked. So if he worked from 7 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Then from 7 a.m. to noon, that's 5 hours. And from noon to 4:30 p.m. is 4.5 hours, which means he made he worked for a total of 9.5 hours. Now they told us that he makes $12 an hour for just his regular 8-hour shift. So for 8 of these hours, he made $12 an hour. And the rest, the leftover, so 1.5 hours, would be his overtime. And for overtime, he makes 50% more per hour. So his regular pay would be 8 hours times $12 an hour, which is $96. But then for overtime, he makes 1.5 times as much as he made for his regular shift. So 12 times 50% more, which would be 1.5, times he worked that for 1.5 hours. So first I'm going to multiply 12 times 1.5. 5 times 2 is 10, carry the 1. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Put a 0 placeholder. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. So we add this together and we get 180, but there's one number behind the decimal. So that means that he was making $18 an hour for that 1.5 hours that he worked overtime. So now we multiply 18 times 1.5. And 5 times 8 is 40. Carry the 4. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 4 is 9. 0 placeholder. 1 times 8 is 8. 1 times 1 is 1. We add those together. 17, carry the 1. One number behind the decimal. One number behind the decimal. So that means he made $27 in overtime. So his total amount that he made that day would be the sum of the amount of money he made for his regular shift and the amount he made for overtime. So we need to add $96 and $27. 7 plus 6 is 13. Carry the 1. 9, 10, 11, 12. So that means he made $123 that day. The table shows the cost of renting a bicycle for 1, 2, or 3 hours. Which of the following equations best represents the data if C represents the cost and H represents the time of rental? Since this is a multiple choice question, you could always substitute these values or substitute these values for hours into your equation and see if you get the cost. For instance, you could replace H with 1 and you have $3.60 or $3.60 times 1, which is $3.60, which is the cost for 1 hour. And then do the same with 2 and with 3. Because sometimes an equation will work for one set of data, but not for the other two. So you should test it on all of them. However, I'll show you how to solve this problem if it weren't multiple choice. So we're going to write our own function rule using the data. First, looking at hours and cost, your cost is dependent on the number of hours you rent the bike. Cost then is the dependent variable. And I want to focus on my dependent variable and see what kind of changes are happening. So from $3.60 to $7.20, I'm adding $3.60. From $7.20 to $10.80, I'm again adding $3.60. So I can see that the change in Y is constant, or the change in the cost in the dependent variable is constant. I want to now compare and see what's happening with my independent variable, my time. So from 1 to 2, I increase by 1. From 2 to 3, I also increase by 1. So there's a constant change in my independent, my time, as well. This tells me that there's a linear relationship here. So to write my function rule, I simply need to find my rate of change, which is the change in Y divided by the change in X. And the Y, that's the dependent variable, whereas X is the independent variable. And we've already established that our cost is dependent, therefore our cost is our Y. And we've already found the change in Y, it's $3.60. Divided by the change in X, 1. So our rate of change is simply $3.60. And that rate of change is what you're multiplying the independent variable by to get the dependent variable. So I've now found that the cost is equal to $3.60 times my independent variable of H. And then we can check and see if it works. So let's replace H with 1. $3.60 times 1 is $3.60. Try it with 2. $3.60 times 2 is $7.20. Finally, 3. $3.60 times 3 is $10.80. So that verifies that our function rule works for this situation and is correct. So answer A. Which of the following expressions is equivalent to the quantity A plus B times the quantity A minus B? Well, this is actually a rule that you would memorize, but you don't have to memorize it. You can always just take these binomials and multiply them together using FOIL. The F stands for first, meaning to multiply the first terms in each set of parentheses. So A times A. And A times A is A squared. Then O stands for outer or outside. So you multiply the two terms on the outsides, or A and negative B. So A times negative B is negative AB. I stands for inner or inside. So you multiply the two terms on the inside, B and A. B times A is BA or AB, so plus AB. And finally, the L stands for last. So you multiply the two terms that are in the last positions of each set of parentheses. Positive B times negative B which is negative b squared. Then to simplify, we combine like terms. Negative AB and positive AB are like terms, and they cancel each other out because they're additive inverses of each other, or opposites. So we're left with a squared minus b squared, or answer A. In an election in Kimball County, candidate A obtained 36,800 votes. His opponent, candidate B, obtained 32,100 votes. 2,100 votes went to write-in candidates. What percentage of the votes went to candidate A? To find a percent, we need the part over the whole. And we know the part is the number of votes candidate A received, which is 36,800. What I need to know is the whole, or the total number of votes. To find the total number of votes, we need to add up 36,800, 32,100, and 2,100, so that we can find the total. So we're adding, those are 0, and again we get 0. Then we have 8, 9, 10, so that's a 0, carry the 1. We have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, carry the 1. And we have 3, 6, 7. So that means there were a total of 71,000 votes. Now to find our percent, we need to divide. That'll give us our decimal, which will then change into a percent. But before I divide, I'm going to first simplify this fraction by canceling 2 zeros. And now my division will be a lot easier. So we need to divide 368 by 710. Well, 710 doesn't go into 368 at all, which means I'm going to have to add a decimal and a 0. And now I can divide 710 into 3,680. So I can use compatible numbers here, and 710 is very close to 700. 700 times 5 would be 3,500. So I'm thinking 710 is going to go about 5 times into 3,680. So let me multiply this. We get 0, and that's 5, and that's 35. So 3,550. Yep, looks good. So that's 5. We have 3,550. Now we need to subtract, and that's 0, 3, 1, so 130. Then we need to add a 0 and bring it down. 1,300. So 710, and it's only going to go into 1,300 one time, because 700 plus 700 would be 1,400, and that's too much. So it's just one time. 710 times 1 is 710. Then we need to subtract. So I'm going to borrow from the 1, that's a 0, that's 13. Borrow from the 13, that's 12, which makes that 10. And we'll borrow, well, we don't need to borrow, that's 0. So 10 minus 1 is 9. And 12 minus 7 is 5, 590, which makes sense. If you add 90 back to 710, you get 800. And if you add 500 to 800, you get the 1,300. So we need to add another 0 and bring it down. So now we need to know how many times 710 goes into 5,900. So I'm again going to use that compatible number of 700. So let's see, 700 times 8 would be 5,600. So I'm thinking it goes in there about 8 times. that's 0, and that's 8, and that's 56. So yes, that's very close. So that's 8. And we have 5680. We can subtract, and that's 0. Borrow from the 9, that's an 8, so that's 10. 10 minus 8 is 2. 8 minus 6 is 2, so we get 220. And we could keep going, but really, that's all I need to know, because as I look at my answers, it's very clear which one of these is my answer. This is, well, it's about 518 thousandths, and then when we change it into our percent, we move our decimal 2 places to the right, we get 51 8/10%, which is answer A. Chan receives a bonus from his job. He pays 30% in taxes, gives 30% to charity, and uses another 25% to pay off an old debt. He has $600 remaining from his bonus. What was the total amount of Chan's bonus? First, I want to start with totaling the percentage that he spent or used, the percentage that is not left. So he pays 30% in taxes, gives 30% to charity, and uses the 25% to pay off an old debt. So that's a total of 85% that he has used, which means he had 15% left. And the $600 is the 15% of his total. $600 is 15% of the total amount of his bonus. 600 is equals, change the percent to a decimal, of means to multiply, and we don't know the total, so use a variable, like t. And now we just need to solve for t. So divide both sides by 15/100. So 600 divided by 15/100. We need to move the decimal 2 places to the right, so we do the same to 600. Add 2 zeros, and 15 goes into 60 4 times. 15 times 4 is 60. You subtract and get 0. When you bring down 0, 15 goes into 0 0 times, and that's just going to keep happening 2 more times until we get 4,000. So what was the total amount of Chan's bonus? $4,000. Which of the following is a solution to the inequality 4x minus 12 is less than 4? First, we should solve for x in this inequality. So we're going to add 12 to both sides. Bring down our 4x. Minus 12 plus 12 is 0, so that cancels. Bring down our less than sign. And 4 plus 12 is 16. Then we need to divide both sides by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1, times x is x, is less than 16 divided by 4 is 4. Keep in mind when solving inequalities that if you multiply or divide both sides by a negative number, you must flip the inequality symbol. In this case, we didn't have to, since we didn't divide both sides by a negative number. It's all about that negative. So now we can apply these answer choices. We want to find which one of these numbers is less than 4. Is 7 less than 4? No. Is 6 less than 4? No. Is 5 less than 4? No. What about 4? Is 4 less than 4? No. If this were a less than or equal to sign, if it said x is less than or equal to 4, then yes, 4 would be a solution because 4 is equal to 4. And it only has to be one, either less than or equal to. But in this case, it's not a less than or equal to sign. It's simply a less than sign, meaning that this number must be smaller than 4. So our answer is E. 3 is less than 4, where 3 is a smaller number than 4. Triangle ABC is a right triangle, and angle ACB is 30 degrees. What is the measure of angle BAC? Well, the first thing I want to do is fill in this information, that angle ACB is 30. ACB is this angle right here, and it's 30 degrees. So I know 2 out of the 3 angles of my triangle. And I know that the 3 angles of a triangle add to be 180. So that means that this 90-degree angle plus this 30-degree angle plus the measure of angle BAC right here equals 180. The first thing I need to do is combine like terms. 90 plus 30 is 120, plus the measure of angle BAC is 180 degrees. To solve for the measure of angle BAC, we need to subtract 120 from both sides. 120 minus 120 is 0. Bring down the measure of angle BAC equals 180 minus 120 is 60. So that means the measure of angle BAC is 60 degrees. In the figure, segment BC is 4 units long, segment CD is 8 units long, and segment DE is 6 units long. What is the length of segment AC? The first thing I'd like to do is take this information and actually put it on my picture. So segment BC is 4 units long. Here's segment BC, it's 4. Segment CD is 8 units long. CD is 8. And segment DE is 6 units long. DE is 6 units long. These triangles are not congruent, and that's obvious. If you're looking at them, you can see this triangle is smaller than the other one. However, these right angles are congruent. These vertical angles are congruent. And since 2 angles of this triangle are congruent to 2 angles of the other triangle, that means that the third angles, angle E and angle A, are congruent to each other. Therefore, these 2 triangles are similar to each other because all 3 of their corresponding angles are congruent to each other. And since these triangles are similar, that means that their corresponding sides are proportional. You see that segment BC is half of segment CD. 4 is half of 8. So if we can find the length of segment CE, then we know the length of segment AC is half of that. We're going to find the length of segment CE using the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. We have our two legs. 8 squared plus 6 squared equals C squared. 8 squared is 64, plus 6 squared is 36, equals C squared. 64 plus 36 is 100, equals C squared. Then to solve for C, we need to square root both sides. The square root of 100 is 10, and the square root of C squared is C. So the length of segment CE is 10. And again, the lengths of the sides of triangle ABC are half the corresponding sides of triangle CDE. So since the length of segment CE is 10, that means that the length of segment AC is half of that, or 5. So answer B. Marjorie buys a package of stocks consisting of 100 shares each of Microsoft and Apple, as well as 200 shares of Garmin at today's closing prices as shown in the table. What is the average price per share that she pays for these stocks? To find this average price per share, first I need to find the total price. Then I have to find the total shares and divide, because this is a ratio, price per share. Price divided by shares. So first I'm going to figure out how much money she spent on these shares. So she got 100 shares of Microsoft. So let's start with Microsoft. She bought 100 shares for $45.14 each. So times 45, 14. And multiplying by 100 just means you move that decimal 2 places to the right. So it's $4,514 that she spent on her Microsoft shares. She also bought 100 shares of Apple. So 100 times, and Apple is $16.90. And again, multiplying by 100 just means to move that decimal 2 places to the right. So she spent $1,690 on her Apple shares. Then she got 200 shares of Garmin. So Garmin, 200 times, and Garmin is $29.30. So multiplying by 100 means we move it 2 places to the right, but multiplying by 200 means not only do we multiply or move our decimal 2 places to the right, but we're also going to double that number. So if you double 0, you get 0. If you double 3, you get 6. If you double 9, you get 18, and then we carry the 1 over here, and 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5. So all I did was multiply 200 times $29.30. So I can use this then to find my total amount of money spent. I'm just going to move this up a little so I have some more room. So I'm going to add these 3 costs together to find my total cost, or my total price. So 4 plus 0 is 4. 1 plus 9 is 10, plus 6 is 16. And then we have 8 plus 6 is 14, plus 5 is 19, plus 1 is 20. 5 plus 1 is 6, plus 4 is 10, plus 2 is 12. So that means she spent a total of $12,064 on all of these stocks. That's our price. Now we need to find our shares. And that total can be found right here. Just add these up. 200 plus 100 plus 100. That's a total of 400 shares. So the average price per share would be $12,064 divided by 400 shares. So all we have to do is divide those two numbers. 400 goes into 1206 3 times. 400 times 3 is 1200. Subtract and you get 6. Bring down the 4. 400 does not go into 64 at all, so that's a 0, which means we add a decimal and a 0 and bring it down. 400 goes into 640 1 time, so bring that decimal up. 1 times 400 is 400. And then you subtract and you get 240. Add another 0, bring it down. And 400 goes into 2400 6 times. 400 times 6 is 2400. You subtract and you get a remainder of 0, which means the average price per share is $30.16. The Charleston Recycling Company collects 50,000 tons of recyclable material every month. The chart shows the kinds of materials that are collected by the company's 5 trucks. What is the second most common material that is recycled? This is a pie chart, and a pie chart is a visual representation of data. The data represented in the chart will add up to a total of 100%. 40% plus 25% plus 15% plus 5% plus 15% is a total of 100%. The larger the slice, the larger the percent. And the larger the slice and percent means the more common that piece of data is, or the more times that data occurs. So in this case, they're asking what the second most common material is. And we can see that paper is the most commonly recycled material. It has the largest slice of the pie, and thus the largest percentage. So the second most common recycled would be glass at 25%. B. Jesse invests $7,000 in a certificate of deposit that pays interest at the rate of 7.5% annually. How much interest in dollars does Jesse gain from this investment during the first year that he holds the certificate? This is a great problem to use this formula on. And some people call it IPERT, just as a way to remember it. The I stands for the interest, the amount of interest in dollars, like what we're trying to find. P stands for principal, or the amount that's being invested initially. That would be our $7,000. The R is the rate, or the percentage, but written as a decimal. So we're going to take 7.5% and write it as a decimal. And that'll be our rate. And then T stands for time. So you may want to make a note of that. This I is the interest. P is the principal. R is the rate as a decimal. And the T is the time. So we're going to take our information from our problem and plug it in. So our amount of interest is equal to the principal, $7,000, times the rate as a decimal again. So we're taking 7.5% and changing it to a decimal, which means taking the decimal and moving it 2 places to the left. So we add that 0, so it's 75 thousandths, and then times the year or the time, and we're just trying to find out about the first year. So that means it's been in there for 1 year, and then we just need to multiply those things together. So 1 times anything is just that, so I can really kind of ignore that. So I just need to multiply these 2 numbers together. So I have this 75 thousandths, and I'm going to put it on top because it's very easy to multiply times 7,000, since the first thing I'm going to do is just write down those 3 zeros. And then the only number I really have to multiply by is the 7. So 7 times 5 is 35. Write the 5, carry the 3. 7 times 7 is 49, plus 3 is 52. And then we have 3 numbers behind the decimal, so 3 numbers behind the decimal. And that means that he's going to make $525 off of his investment. So that's the number you would need to bubble in, is 525. A motorcycle manufacturer offers 3 different models, each available in 6 different colors. How many different combinations of model and color are available? There are a couple of different ways we could figure out this problem. First, I'm going to show you a visual representation. So if we say our models are A, B, and C. These are the 3 different models of cars you can get. And then for colors, we use the numbers 1 through 6, since there are 6 colors. Then you could get model A in color 1, color 2, color 3, color 4, color 5, or color 6. Same thing with model B. You could get model B in color 1, color 2, color 3, color 4, color 5, or color 6. And finally, the same with model C. Color 1, color 2, color 3, color 4, color 5, and color 6. And if we count up all of these different combinations, we have 6 for model A, 6 for model B, and 6 for model C, or 6 times 3, which is 18. So instead of writing this all out, we could have taken our 6 colors and multiplied it by our 3 models. 3 times 6 is 18, so there are 18 different model and color combinations. Which of the following statements is true? A. Perpendicular lines have opposite slopes. Close but not quite. It's missing an important word here. And that word is reciprocal. Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. So that is not true. B. Perpendicular lines have the same slopes. Again, not true. That would be parallel lines that have the same slope. Parallel lines are lines that never touch, never intersect. So their slopes would need to be the same so that they would never touch each other. For instance, let's say these lines had a slope of 1/2. Then this line we go up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2, same thing here, up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2, and that way our lines never touch. So it's parallel lines that have the same slopes. So this statement is also not true. C, perpendicular lines have reciprocal slopes. Again, close but missing a very important word, and that is opposite. They have opposite reciprocal slopes. So this is also not true. D, perpendicular lines have, finally, opposite reciprocal slopes. This statement is true. Perpendicular lines do have opposite reciprocal slopes. And E is also not true. It says they're unrelated. Oh, that is so not true. They definitely are related. For instance, let's just take the graph of y equals 2x and y equals -1/2 x. These are two lines that have opposite reciprocal slopes. Opposite meaning that they have different signs. One's negative, one's positive. And reciprocal meaning that the fraction is flipped. So this slope is 2 over 1, whereas this one is -1 over 2. Notice how the fraction is flipped. So first I'll graph y equals 2x. Let me put some marks on my graph here. So y equals 2x, we would go up 2 over 1. And y equals -1/2 x, down, oh, okay, sorry, we could actually graph a line here. It's going through the origin because there is no y-intercept. So there is that line, the y equals 2x line. And then y equals -1/2 x, again, would also go through the origin since it has no y-intercept. And from there, we would go down 1 and over 2. So you can see how these lines intersect each other at right angles because they have opposite reciprocal slopes. A combination lock uses a 3-digit code. Each digit can be any of the 10 available integers 0 through 9. How many different combinations are possible? In this probability problem, there are 3 independent events. Independent meaning they don't affect each other. So to find the possible outcomes, we would have to find the product of the possible outcomes for these 3 independent events. So the possible outcomes would be first the possible outcomes for the first digit, 10, since there are 10 available numbers, times the possible outcomes for the second digit, which again is 10 integers, times the possible outcomes for the third digit, which is again 10. So the probability is 10, or the possible outcomes is 10 times 10, which is 100, times 10, which is 1,000 possible outcomes. This is the quicker way to do it. Of course, you can always see by actually writing the combinations. 0, 0, 0 would be the first. Then 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 2, 0, 0, 3, 0, 0, 4, 5, 6, etc., all the way up to 999, which makes it seem like there are 999 possible outcomes. But really, we have to count this first one, the 0, 0, 0, which gives us the total of 1,000 possible outcomes. An airplane leaves Atlanta at 2 p.m. and flies north at 250 miles per hour. A second airplane leaves Atlanta 30 minutes later and flies north at 280 miles per hour. At what time will the second airplane overtake the first? Well, this is a DIRT problem, or distance equals rate times time. You see we've got time, 30 minutes later, we've got rate, 280 miles per hour, 250 miles per hour. We've got distance here because both these planes are flying a distance, and that's how their rate and time are related. So we need to use this formula to help us organize our data. So first let's find the distance for the first airplane. The rate of the first airplane is 250 miles per hour. So 250 times, and then all we know is what time the first airplane left. We don't know how long that airplane flew. So we've got to use T for time there. Now the distance for the second airplane, the rate is 280 miles per hour. And we do know a little bit about the time that the second airplane flew. If you'll notice, the second airplane is going faster than the first one. So if they left from the same place and they go in the same direction, they're both going north, then the second airplane is eventually going to catch up with the first and actually pass the first. And that's what we're trying to figure out, is at what time will the second airplane catch up to or overtake the first. So the second airplane won't have been flying as long as the first airplane when it catches up. It's going faster, and it left 30 minutes later. So however long this first airplane has been flying, the second one will have been flying that time minus 30 minutes, since it left 30 minutes later. Now if you think about this, you've got two planes leaving from Atlanta. They're both flying north. And the question is, when will the second one overtake the first one? Well, this is what we're trying to find out, is what time that will happen. Well, at that time, both of these airplanes will have flown the exact same distance. We don't know what that distance is, but we know that it's the same. So we can take these two distances and we can set them equal. So the distance of plane 1, 250 t, is equal to the distance of plane 2, 280 times the quantity, t minus 30. And now we need to solve for t. So the first thing we want to do is distribute our 280. So I'm going to bring down this 250t equals 280 times t, 280t, minus 280 times 30. 280 times 30, 0 placeholder, 3 times 0 is 0, 3 times 8 is 24, 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. That's 8,400. Now we need to get all of our variables on the same side of the equation. We don't want to have t on the left side and t on the right side. So I'm going to subtract 280t from both sides. 250t minus 280t. I'm taking away more than I have, so I'm going to end up with a negative. And the difference between 280t and 250t is 30t. So negative 30t equals, and by subtracting this 280t, I've actually canceled that term on the right side. And I'm left with negative 8,400. To solve for t, then, we need to divide both sides by a negative 30. Negative 30 divided by negative 30 is 1, times t is simply t. Negative 8,400 divided by negative 30. First of all, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Then we can cancel a 0. And really all we have to do is divide 840 by 3. Really, I'm running out of space here. I'm going to get rid of this so we can divide 840 by 3. 3 goes into 8 2 times. That's 6. Subtract and you get 2. Bring down the 4. 3 goes into 24. 8 times. 3 times 8 is 24. Subtract and you get 0. Bring down your 0. 3 goes into 0 0 times. So it's 280. But 280 what? Well, if you'll recall, we did t minus 30 minutes. So that would mean that these t's are in minutes. So we just found how many minutes the first plane, t, the first plane would have been flying when the second plane overtook it. So we need to first convert these minutes into hours and minutes so that we can then find the time, what time it was when that happened. So to convert these minutes into hours, there are 60 minutes in 1 hour, which means we need to divide 280 by 60. So we've got 60, 120, 180, 240. So 60 goes into 280 4 times and you get 240. You subtract and you get a remainder of 40 minutes. So that's 4 hours, 40 minutes. So 4 hours, 40 minutes after the first plane left at 2 p.m. is when the second plane overtook it or caught up with it or had traveled the same distance. So 2 plus 4 hours is 6 and 40 minutes. So at 6:40 is when p.m. is when that second plane overtook the first. Answer C. The distance traveled by a moving object is computed from the relation distance equals rate times time, where r is the rate of travel, speed, and t is the time of travel. A Major League pitcher throws a fastball at a speed of 125 feet per second. The distance from the pitching rubber to home plate is 60 5/10 feet. How long, in seconds, does it take a fastball to travel this distance? Compute your answer to the nearest hundredth of a second. So first I'm going to pull out this formula. That's going to be very helpful in solving this problem. Distance equals the rate times the time. Now I want to take the information I was given and substitute it into this equation. So they told me the speed of the ball. And remember, speed is your rate, r. So that means I'm going to replace r with 125. Then they also gave me the distance, 60 5/10 feet, which means I'm going to replace d with distance, 60 5/10. And so t is what I'm trying to find. So the t will stay there in my equation. So in order to find t, to find time, we need to solve for t by dividing both sides by 125. 125 divided by 125 is 1, times t is t. So to find our answer, we need to divide 60 5/10 by 125. So I'll work it over here. 60 5/10 divided by 125. So that decimal goes right there. 125 does not go into 60, but it does go into 605. So you've got 125, 250, 500, and then one more time would be 625, so that means it only goes 4 times. And that is 500. We subtract, and we get 105. Add another 0, bring it down. We want to see how many times 125 goes into 1,050. Well, if you'll remember that 125 times 4 was 500, then it would go twice as many times as that, so 8 times. And that would give us 1,000. We subtract that and we get 50. Add another 0, bring it down. And 125 goes into 500 4 times. 125 times 4 is 500. Subtract and you get 0. So that means that the time would be 484 thousandths seconds. But if we go back to our instructions, it said to compute your answer to the nearest hundredth, which means I need to round this to the hundredths place. The 8 is in the hundredths place, and that 4 tells the 8 to stay the same. So it's simply 48 hundredths seconds. Rachel spent $24.15 on vegetables. She bought 2 pounds of onions, 3 pounds of carrots, and 1.5 pounds of mushrooms. If the onions cost $3.69 per pound and the carrots cost $4.29 per pound, what is the price per pound of mushrooms? So first, I want to figure out how much money was spent on the onions that were $3.69 per pound, and how much was spent on the carrots that were $4.29 per pound. So let's start with the onions. Those onions cost $3.69 for every pound that's purchased. And she purchased 2 pounds. So we need to multiply $3.69 times 2 to find the total amount of money spent on onions. So 2 times 9 is 18, carry the 1. 2 times 6 is 12 plus 1 is 13, write the 3, carry the 1. 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 is 7. 2 numbers behind the decimal, 2 numbers behind the decimal. So that means she spent $7.38 out of her total on onions. We're going to do something similar to find the total amount of money spent on carrots. So next we'll deal with our carrots. The carrots were $4.29 per pound. So $4.29 times 3, since she bought 3 pounds of carrots. 3 times 9 is 27, write the 7, carry the 2. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. And 3 times 4 is 12. 2 numbers behind the decimal, 2 numbers behind the decimal. So she spent a total of $12.87 on carrots. And so now I'm going to find the total spent on onions and carrots. So that means I'm just going to add these two values together. So $12.87 plus $7.38. Make sure that when you add or subtract decimals that you line those decimals up. So we can go ahead and bring that down right now. 7 plus 8 is 15. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 7, 9, 10. So that means she spent $20.25 on the onions and carrots. And that, knowing that, will help us find out what amount was left to be spent on the mushrooms. Since I know her total spent on all of the vegetables is $24.15, I can take that total and subtract $20.25, which was spent on onions and carrots, and what I'll have is the amount of money she spent on the mushrooms. So again, we line up our decimals. 5 minus 5 is 0. I can't take 2 from 1, so I borrow from the 4. It becomes a 3. Then I have 11 minus 2, which is 9. Bring that decimal down. 3 minus 0 is 3. So she had $3.90 to spend on mushrooms. But what we need to know is what the price per pound was, which we can find using this information. She bought 1.5 pounds of mushrooms. So we need to take the total amount spent on mushrooms and divide that by how many pounds of mushrooms she purchased, which was 1.5 or 1 5/10. Now we need to move the decimal 1 place in both of our numbers, so that's where it is now. And 15 goes into 39 2 times. 15 times 2 is 30. Subtract and you get 9. Bring down the 0. 15 goes into 90 6 times. 15 times 6 is 90. Subtract and you get 0. So no remainder. But we can add a 0 here since we're talking about money. So that means that the mushrooms were $2.60 per pound, which is answer A. If 12 divided by x is equal to 30 divided by 6, what is the value of x? This is a proportion. A proportion is a ratio set equal to a ratio. And a ratio is simply the comparison of two numbers, or a fraction. And proportions are pretty cool because their cross products are equal to each other. That means that 12 times 6 is equal to x times 30, which we could simplify to say 72 is equal to 30x. And then we can solve for x by dividing both sides by 30. So 72 divided by 30. 30 goes into 72 2 times, which gives us 60. We subtract and we get 12. So we add a decimal and a 0 and bring down the 0. And 30 goes into 120 4 times. 30 times 4 is 120. We subtract and get 0. So that means that 2 4/10 is equal to x, which is answer B. Mark is driving to Phoenix from a city located 210 miles north. He drives the first 10 miles in 12 minutes. If he continues at the same rate, how long will it take him to reach his destination? We can use a proportion to solve this problem. We know that the first 10 miles took him 12 minutes. So that's one ratio. 10 miles took 12 minutes. What we want to know is how long it took him to drive the 210 miles. And since it's at the same rate, he continues in the same rate, we can use this proportion to solve and find how long it's going to take him in minutes. Miles to minutes, miles to minutes. And to solve a proportion, we cross multiply. So 10 times x is 10x equals 12 times 210. So I'm going to multiply that right over here. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 0 placeholder. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. And we add these together. 0, 2, 5, 2. So 2,520. And then to solve for x, we need to divide both sides by 10. So x equals, you can just cancel a 0 here, 252. 252 what? Well, 252 minutes. But as you can see, our answers aren't in minutes. They're in hours and minutes. So we need to figure out just how many hours and then leftover minutes there are in 252 minutes. And since there are 60 minutes in 1 hour, I need to divide 252 by 60. So 252 divided by 60. So 60 does not go into 25. 60 goes into 252. 60, 120, 180, 240. So 4 times, because 4 times 6 is 24, and 4 times 60 is 240. We subtract, and we get 12 that's left over. So that means 252 minutes is 4 hours and 12 minutes left over. So that is answer choice B, 4 hours and 12 minutes. Figure 9 shows 2 quarter circles centered on the origin of the Cartesian coordinate plane. The inner circle has a radius of 2 units. The outer circle has a radius of 3 units. What is the area of the shaded region? So that's right in here. And so if you can just imagine it, this circle would continue going, as would this larger circle. So since it's been split into quarters, all we're finding the area of is a quarter of those circles. So first let's start with what the formula for the area of a circle is. It's pi times radius squared. As we discussed though, this is only a quarter of these circles. So our area is a quarter of the area of these circles. So, and then we need to find the area of just the part between those 2 circles. So that would be the area of the large circle minus the area of the small circle. And the area of the large circle would be pi times the radius, which is 3 squared, minus the area of the small circle, which would be pi times 2 squared. And the 3 and the 2 came from the radius. The radius of the small circle is 2, and the radius of the outer circle has a radius of 3. So that's where these numbers came from. And now let's simplify that. So we get area is 1/4 of 3 squared is 9, so 9 pi, minus 2 squared is 4, so 4 pi. Now since each one of these terms has a pi in it, we can factor the pi out. So we get area equals 1/4 pi times the quantity 9 minus 4. And then we can simplify 9 minus 4, so we have area equals 1/4 pi times 5. And 1/4 times 5 is 5/4, so that's 5/4 pi. But of course, if you're needing to bubble this in on an answer sheet, then you don't have the option of bubbling pi. So we're going to have to multiply 5/4 times pi. And 5/4 times pi is 1 25/100 pi. And for pi, we'll just use 3 1400. So we're doing 1 25/100 times 3 1400. And that I'm going to do over here. So 3 1400 times 1 25/100. And that's my pi. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 1 is 5. That's 7. 5 times 3 is 15. Put a 0 placeholder. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 3 is 6. Put 2 0 placeholders. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 3 is 3. Add that together. That's 0. 7 plus 8 is 15. Carry the 1. 5, 9, 10, 12. Carry the 1. 6, 7, 8, 9. 3. And then we have 4 numbers behind the decimal. 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers behind the decimal. So, and then we could round this to 3 93/100 would be the area of just the shaded region. Raphael has a business selling computers. He buys computers from the manufacturer for $450 each and sells them for $800. Each month, he must also pay fixed costs of $3,000 for rent and utilities at his store. If he sells N computers in a month, which of the following equations can be used to calculate his profit? Profit. Profit is found by subtracting the money you spend from the money you earn. So we know that he earns $800 for each computer that he sells. That's money he earns, $800 for each computer, which means to multiply times the number of computers he sells. And that's all the money he makes, so everything else is money he spends. So from the money he earns, we need to subtract $450 for each computer, because that's how much he has to pay the manufacturer. So minus 450 in. And we also have to subtract $3,000 flat. So just $3,000. Now if we compare what we have to these equations, we know we can already eliminate A. It doesn't even take the $3,000 into account, so A's out. On B, if we distributed this in, we'd be subtracting $3,000 in, which is not right. We're not losing $3,000 for every computer we sell, so B's out. On C, it has us multiplying 3,000 times in, which would be great. He'd be making tons of money, but that's not this situation. In D, when we distribute the N, the number of computers, N times 800, 800 N, minus N times 450, so minus 450 N, and then minus 3,000. So D's looking pretty good. The problem with E is, instead of subtracting the $3,000 he spends on rent and utilities, they're adding it back in like that's more money he's making. But he's not making that money, he's losing that money. So D would be the correct answer choice.